Having come back from Romania, having spent 2 months over there, I couldn't help but to notice the huge amount of singles over there, as well as the same thing that's happening in Canada and the USA. The overwhelming number of singles and the great divide that there is between men and women these days. And of course, this gives rise to forces and system of assuagement, which take the form of either irrational feminism or irrational MGTOW, men going their own way. And I guess I certainly cannot blame these individuals for taking refuge in those directions, because there is really no other way for them to go. It's very difficult to meet the opposite sex and also to develop an association with the opposite sex, and followed by a relationship with the opposite sex. There's a huge chasm that one has to negotiate before making that connection with the opposite gender. The way things are developing are that in the West, of course, it's different in the Muslim world, where it's you know living under Sharia law is virtually identical to living under communism. Everything is arranged by a central entity to which you submit. Communism demands that, and so does Sharia law. So pretty well, one's life from birth to death is more or less arranged, more or less expected, more or less patterned, and supervised by the authority of other individuals within that system. They're the enforcers, communism and Sharia law. In the West, we don't have that, so we're pretty well individuals. We're pretty well on our own. We're pretty well have to face all the consequences of individualism. And we have to also succumb to the dreaded word that anybody on the left doesn't want to hear, and that's inequality. Like it or not, when you're in an individualistic system, you're going to be subjected to unbridled inequality in everything that you do. And one of those areas is being in a relationship, or trying to be in a relationship, attempting to form an association with someone of the opposite gender. It's very difficult in the West, and it has gotten increasingly, and is getting more and more increasingly very difficult. We are living in a society where, in the West, where culturally women have given unprecedented and undeserved rights and privileges over men. And what women don't realize is it is actually a taking advantage of female nature by those entities who are to gain from taking advantage. And women fall for it. Therefore, women are catered to and appeased by the state. We're living in an era of the single voter, not the family structure. And single individuals, men and women, mainly women now, are going to be the deciders of political outcomes, as in the election coming up. And largely they're being manipulated by addressing their fears and their insecurities with the false presentation of promise, the false promise of security and safety, because they know that women are perpetually looking for that. So unmarried people began to outnumber married people a few decades ago. They were going in that direction, and I'm particularly cognizant and perceptive of the single individual, specifically single women. And I study single women. I study how they live and how they justify and how they rationalize their situation. Single women are just as stuck in their incapacities as single men are stuck in their incapacities. And not to promote traditionalism. I'm not a great believer of traditionalism, even though I lived it and I went through it in all of its aspects. I don't condone it. However, I do condone relationships, and I do condone relating to the opposite gender, which is a very difficult thing to do. People don't realize. I think men realize that much more than women do. Women live in this world of fantasy and self-delusion. This insincerity towards themselves is what women exhibit. And much of that is done under the guise of feigned confidence, self-confidence, female aggression, an exaggeration of it, and an overdoing of those personality traits in order to relieve, alleviate, soothe, assuage the loneliness and the emptiness. If not loneliness, if they don't want to admit to loneliness, they have to agree to emptiness of their situation and their life, their everyday life. They want to lessen, they want to diminish the struggle with emptiness. And as I'm talking, and I have talked in previous lectures about the undeveloped woman, the single woman cannot escape the condition of being an undeveloped woman, which robs her of the skills and the emotional ability to initiate and sustain any type of relationship with a man. She simply doesn't know how to do it. It's like anything else in life, it can be simplified right down to its very basics. And an analogy can be linked to any other activity in which you don't have experience and you don't have skill. It's all learned behavior. It's all acquiring the skills through trial and error and in living with somebody. Living with, generally speaking, with an individual, and specifically with living somebody of the opposite gender, which is a monumental task to pull off. Be it a cohabitation situation or be it a long-term marriage. It's a struggle. It's an everyday struggle. It's a very difficult thing to pull off, even existing with another individual. And then when different aspects are introduced into the situation, such as namely sexuality, attraction, and the demands and the expectations that go along with any type of so-called romantic relationship, sexual relationship, a real one, not a superficial one, a real one, not a situational relationship, not a temporary relationship, not a relationship of convenience. Convenience for lack of emotional capacity and skill, not a relationship engendered by opportunism or emotional angst, emotional overcompensation, emotional self-validation, but a relationship which is based on an offering of the self, metaphorically spreading one's legs, but not in terms of physically, but emotionally, spreading yourself open. This is something that most women do not have the courage to do. They're too afraid. They're incapacitated. They're immobilized. They're paralyzed to do so. So they build a bubble around themselves. And it's a bubble which is impermeable by any male that comes along. Now, they may contend that, saying that, oh, if the right male came along, somebody who I deserve, because, of course, their condescension and arrogance demands that the male must live up to their standards. So they imagine that if such a mythical male was to come along, then they would, without hesitation, spread their legs and open their hearts to such a male. But that is dangerous fantasy. Because if they were to open up, open their hearts, make themselves available, those males are all around them. All they have to do is see, notice, acknowledge, perceive, identify individuals around them, individuals they come across, which they fail to do. Something blocks them. They cannot see outside their bubble. That's where the problem lies. They're too afraid to step outside of their bubble, and they're too afraid to let anybody in to their bubble. The solution? Get rid of the bubble completely. Get rid of the bubble and open up. Open up, not physically or sexually, but open up emotionally, in which your emotions are placed out in the open, exposed, made vulnerable, with the constant potential of your emotions being trampled on any moment. That's what I call a real relationship. And a real relationship which demands for its existence transparency and sincerity, utter sincerity. Something like that is extremely difficult to pull off. And in an arranged situation, it's actually easier because the romantic, the sexual, the attraction is eliminated from the equation, which eliminates a lot of potential problems. What you're left with, interestingly enough, is you're left with duty and obligation. So you do everything out of duty and obligation and expectation. The political system, the religious political system demands a certain way for you to behave and a certain obligations by both sides to be fulfilled. But in the individualistic Western type of romantic relationship, which should be based primarily, and initially at least, on sexual attraction, a lot of difficulties are introduced just because of the demands of that kind of relationship, the demands of it from both sides. And as we've talked before, the directionality of the male and the female is always going to be different. I always get a kick out of seeing a young couple. They must have just met maybe a few weeks prior. And they're out on a date. They're walking around in the park. And I get a laugh out of it because I know that both of them are there for the entirely different reason. And neither one of them wants to acknowledge that or is even aware of it. And the bombshell will get released possibly after commitment has been made. And it's like, whoa, this is not what I thought I was signing up for. This is not what my fantasy was all about. Basically, both of them have their own fantasies, which are in conflict with each other's fantasies. They're diametrically opposed. And there's a pretense. They're both living under incongruous fantasies which do not converge and never will. And conceding is painful and will be for both sides. Having skills means that it's just like any other form of behavior. It has to be learned, especially when both males and females do not understand the opposite gender and how they function. You have to know their motivations, and you have to know their source of validation, and how to make a woman feel like a woman and make a man feel like a man. If you fail in that task, the relationship is done, or it's a constant struggle and suffering, which will affect your physical health and your mental health and your emotional health and everything else. So it's learning how the other functions. Learning male nature, learning female nature. And there's a great ignorance in that from both sides. However, particularly with females, they will not be diminished to the point where they're going to make an effort. Most of them. Hence, the preponderance of the undeveloped single woman. And if you're going to be with a man, you have to be skilled with being with a man. You can't be skilled in being a woman. You have to be skilled specifically in being with a man and knowing what a man is. Even identifying what the man is. Identifying what a man is. Identifying the male personality types, the beta and the alpha male, knowing the negatives, the positives, virtues, the vices of either of those personality types, and knowing exactly what to expect from the two personality types. The big mistake that the undeveloped woman makes is expecting something from a particular male, which that male naturally is unable to deliver. We've heard the term irrational expectations. Women are too picky. You should never settle for anything below you. We've heard all these cliches. Usually this is told by women to other women. The undeveloped woman loves to give counsel to another undeveloped woman. Much of it is based on envy of each other. An undeveloped woman does not want to see another undeveloped woman be happy or to gain advantage over her, with the intention that no undeveloped woman gains advantage over the one giving the advice. Direction given by a woman is always done with the intention that no woman will be improved in her condition over the others in the group. That none of them in the group will rise above the group itself. The undeveloped woman does not realize this or chooses to deny it. In fact, undeveloped women will go as far as to sabotage any opportunity that any one of them in the group may have to rise above the group itself. They would actually give false counsel, malicious intent, in order to sabotage in a very passive aggressive, underhanded manner the prospects and the opportunities that any woman in the group may be presented with. And I'm talking particularly in the area of a possible relationship, quality relationship. The other undeveloped women in the group really detest witnessing this happening to any one of them in the group. Taking counsel and believing that it is benevolent and helpful for her future. In fact, it being the complete opposite, leading to her detriment. So much of their motivation is malicious. Yet the undeveloped woman does not realize this or acknowledge it or simply denies it. It can be very dangerous and destructive. What one undeveloped woman will do to another undeveloped woman. Behavioral direction is given, usually by women to women, which can be very dangerous, and literally it'll lead to nothing, nowhere, only destruction. Many times women want to destroy other women out of envy, jealousy. They will, of course, put the facade of benevolence and goodness on any behavior or deed which they display, even towards their so-called friends, close friends. This is a dynamic which I have witnessed and experienced many times between women. And a lot of the time, the male in the equation becomes the victim of the machinations of the corruption of female nature, the immorality of female nature. Women are naturally predisposed to insincerity, hence the whore, emotional insincerity. That is the fundamental underpinning of the whore. And women are naturally predisposed to this by default. This is the way they react to any emotionally challenging situation or in order to reach a particular incentive. Emotional insincerity will be a tool used in any contrivance which will maintain her self-preservation, her self-esteem, which is very, very important. Be it real or imaginary, as long as she feels and can maintain self-esteem. She will use this mechanism by default towards any other female who threatens her self-image. This is the exact dynamic that I had witnessed in Romania while being with the bubble girl and studying her relationship with her friends who are also undeveloped females, single females, and the dynamic between them. Envy is a very huge characteristic of female nature. But we will not go there in this lecture. We'll save that for later. But the information given to the blind by the blind is nonsensical and destructive. Women can only learn about men and relationships with men from men, not from other undeveloped single women who really don't want the benefit for other undeveloped single women. The benefit stated from being a single undeveloped woman is for the denial of emptiness and the vicious self-deception and being mired perpetually in that state of undevelopment, being surrounded by other undeveloped single women. This virtually guarantees for the single undeveloped woman to remain within her group as a single undeveloped woman, perpetually, using endless assuagement to console herself and to use the group as a support mechanism of other identical single undeveloped women being mired in the same predicament. Devoid of any male development. Male development actually increases the femininity in a woman, where undevelopment increases the masculinity within the female, which is not an appealing trait to any man. It's only appealing to other women of the same type. Self-appeasement that women engage in, that they must engage in, to deal with their condition of singlehood. But what it all comes down to is that they do not know men. They were never interested in men. That's why they do not know men. And they go into a situation not recognizing what any particular man is and is capable of, given his personality type. Men usually end up being with women below their level because of their selection criteria not being based on merit of utility, whereas for women, most of their selection is based on utility and practicality, prudence, and pragmatism, a projection of what she is going to be able to extract from that particular male in terms of utility. What men fail to recognize is that this utility is in both the form of material utility, but also emotional utility in reference for the future. So if any particular male does not meet her specific expectations in terms of materialistic or emotional utility, he will be discarded. He will be let go from his position because the relationship will no longer work for her. two types of utility that a woman needs to extract from any male. Doesn't matter who you are. Two types of utility. Materialistic utility, which all men know about. But the other, just as important, is emotional utility. 1, 2. Emotional utility. Materialistic utility and emotional utility. I want to stress the element of emotional utility, which most men do not account for, acknowledge, or even realize its very important existence in bringing gratification to any woman. Where for the male, mostly it is based on validation procurement, which is derived from sexuality, which is derived from attraction, physical attraction. A male will usually bypass a very valuable and worthwhile and admirable female for her lack of physical attractiveness. The word arousal is usually a very threatening word to any woman, especially the undeveloped single woman. They simply don't understand the concept of male arousal and how that takes a primary role, the most fundamental role, the very first effect in the element of attraction, arousal. A male must primarily, initially, be predominantly aroused in order to function, in order to move forward in pursuing a female. So if the attractiveness of the female is not present, the male will simply not be aroused and the male will simply not be able to function. He will not desire the female. Where a lot of women specifically select the male for his utilitarian value, be it emotional or material, preferably both. That one's a keeper. Right, girls? Often claiming that physical is only superficial and it's fleeting. This only happens when the utility outweighs attractiveness of the male. And simply attractiveness of the male is not sustainable in the mind of the female as being worthy of a long-term engagement. So women are notoriously fallible when it comes to selecting the partner. And women do the selecting, we all know that. Men are creatures of opportunity. And that's largely because men have a very different criteria for deciding to be with a woman when compared to women and what their criteria are. It's basically comes right down to the source of validation, which is extremely different for men and women. And the source of validation is where the fundamental, the root, the foundation of the inequality between men and women lies. The difference in the source of validation. And that's why it is very accurate when the typical ignorant female of any age, usually the undeveloped female, makes what they think is the derogatory statement that all men are pigs. Well, the truth of it all is that all men are pigs and all women are whores. And that goes right to the source of their validation, which is extremely, extremely different.